all of those of you who have joined in, we welcome you to this Santa Fe Distinguished Lecture Series program with Professor, author, poet, Roya Hakakian. And of course, you'll be looking at her recent book, A Beginner's Guide to America. The Boston Globe calls your book, of course, lyrical, perceptive, a love letter to the nation. And you've also been called one of the most gifted and evocative writers of our day. It was interesting that when you came to the United States, you studied poetry with Allen Ginsberg, which must have been a special experience. And I've been impressed with the publications that you write for, the New York Times and so many others, the Guggenheim Fellowship. It's a remarkable record. You will be interviewed today by Gloria Abella Ballen, who is in her own right an award-winning artist and author, and especially the book, The Power of the Hebrew Alphabet, which won Best Book Awards and other things. So it's a pleasure to have the two of you here, and we look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is really a pleasure for me to get to meet and to talk to Roya Hakakian. Her book, when I got my hands on this book, I started reading it and I felt totally delighted. I felt somebody was talking about me. I felt that even though in the beginning you start talking about, you use the I, then later you use the you, which I feel that it includes those of us who have also the same experience of migrating, entering into the US, and becoming naturalized Americans. Ron, in his introduction, described some of the adjectives that have described you and your writing. And I think your writing is so witty, so insightful, and also very honest, which is really wonderful. I think this is a book for everyone to read and to understand the two faces that we face. And so I will ask you, or I would say, that as a naturalized American citizen, you have beautifully placed a double mirror in your writing on the process of entering, discovering, and being American. How did being Jewish Iranian influence this experience?
Hi, Gloria, and hi, Ron. Hi, everyone. I'm trying to choke back tears, Gloria, because it's a special compliment to hear from a fellow immigrant that I got it right. Because oftentimes through the process of writing this book, I kept, I actually tried not to let myself doubt that I was writing on behalf of all of us, which isn't to say that I was capturing all of our experiences, but I thought that I was capturing some of our experiences collectively. And so it's a great pleasure and reassurance to hear from a fellow immigrant that you feel that the book spoke to you and spoke to your experiences. I think, and I'm particularly happy that you think it was witty, because I thought of this book in 2016 when there was very little to laugh about. And politically, there was such an anti-immigrant, air dominating all of our political discussions, that I think the most immediate response on any immigrant's part might have been, or probably was, anger. And the one thing I didn't want to do was to be angry, because I, aside from the fact that it's unproductive, I also thought that how could it help this conversation about immigrants and immigration? So I reached for wit in lieu of anger, hoping that that sense of easiness may connect to readers better. So I'm glad that it spoke to you in that way also. You're asking how being an Iranian Jew has informed my view of the United States and immigration. And I think the best answer that I can give is that I came already with the skills of a marginal person. I think we all, had I come from a nation where I had been part of the majority, then suddenly moving to the United States as an immigrant, as an Iranian immigrant, not part of this culture, not having the language of this culture, not sharing in the religion of this people, I might have felt particularly at odds with the society surrounding me. But I think, I suppose, the advantage of being an Iranian Jew was that I had already been a marginal person. I knew what it was like not to be part of the majority society, and I think I had the skills to, in some ways, be comfortable being on the periphery and watching, making observations from the periphery. And I think that's in some ways part of, I hope, the strength of the book, which is the perspective of somebody who is critically and lovingly looking in from the periphery of the society, trying to inform the readers about a very touchy conversation, which is at the moment immigration.
Yes, you're right. Well, since you came very early on you were a teenager.
Yes.
So we see that the cultural and social changes in America in the last 4 decades or so have been monumental.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see those changes affecting immigrants and freedom of speech,
mm-hmm.
women, ethnicity,
mm-hmm.
and race? Because we have immigrants in all these.
I think the most important change that and I'm sure you observe, is that we are becoming somewhat immigrant unfriendly, or at least refugee unfriendly. In the past 4 years, one of the constant messages that I was hearing, especially being an Iranian whose country was placed on a banned, on a list of banned nations. And by the way, one of the reactions that provoked in me was complete panic, because once Iran was placed on the list of banned nations, the program that had sponsored my mother and me, which was a HIAS program, a refugee organization that has brought religious minorities who've been persecuted from various countries into America for more than a century, was shut down in Austria. So even Iranian Jews who were leaving Iran because they were, for the similar reasons that I had left, could no longer get into the United States because of that ban. And so my first reaction was one of complete panic, because as irrational as it was, I thought, what if I, instead of, 1985, I was to come to the United States in 2016. I would have not been allowed in. My life would not have been this life. Many of the refugees or Iranian Jews who had come to Austria hoping to come to the United States were forced to return to Iran because they couldn't stay in Austria since the program had shut down. And the thought that that could have happened to me was really was quite earth-shattering. To think that, for a moment, for a split second, my life could have been something entirely different. I would not have gotten in. I would have had to go back. So to answer your question, our attitudes seem to have changed, or at least some of us think that we cannot afford to have refugees, or we cannot afford to have more immigrants, or we should have a special group of immigrants as opposed to other groups of immigrants. And I, part of the reason why I really felt compelled to write this book was to say that here I was, this, this bereft teenager in 1985. I arrived in America. I had been influenced by all the anti-American propaganda that I had been exposed to in Iran. And, 30 some years later, here I am, a naturalized citizen and feeling very strongly, positively about this country. And I thought it was for me to make that argument why, in fact, people like you, people like me, make this country in the image that it was envisioned when it was envisioned, centuries ago by a group of visionary individuals. That we are the ones who come particularly under the circumstances that George Washington wrote speeches about, and we see why this is a destination. And once we are accepted, then we become sort of the promoters of the cause. We become believers in this fundamental vision. And I think that in some ways we are essential, not because we help the economy or we revive various cities, but also because I think we renew that original American vision that oftentimes those who've been born and raised in this country can lose sight of. So I see multiple purposes to why we as immigrants are essential.
That is it's very interesting that you put immigrants as the essential individuals in this country. In a way, if we do a comparison of what is happening with other industrialized countries, mm-hmm. America is the only country that is having revitalized the population, while the other industrialized countries are having older populations that are not being revitalized. And this revitalization, it's because the immigrants are having babies, they are having new children, and so there will be more people to work, to pay taxes, to help the country and so on. But talking about some of the things that you talk about in your book is coming from Iran, where freedom of speech, it's not, the ideal. You talk about the freedom of speech in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what can you talk about the freedom of speech when, like today, at the University of California in Berkeley,
Mm-hmm.
they were willing to discipline people for making statements such as America is a melting pot, or everyone can succeed in this country if they work hard enough. So would you like to elaborate on freedom of speech, loneliness, and the wealth of possibilities in this country?
You know, maybe part of what happens, you know, whenever there is an abundance of uh, any uh, any asset or privilege is that we have to go to the other extreme in order to finally arrive at a middle ground to reach a reasonable balance. Maybe that's what explains it. But I think um, one of the great losses or misunderstandings that we could potentially commit is to think that our emphasis on the notion of integrating and including the multiplicity of ethnicities and peoples from all walks of life into our umbrella notion, into our overarching definition of America and Americanness was not a good thing. In fact, you asked me early on how my experience of being an Iranian has informed my experience of being an immigrant. And I always return in my mind to probably the most formative moment of my life, which is 1979 in Iran, the year that the Iranian Revolution took place. I was a very young girl. But the one thing that I took away from that experience was the joy and the absolute ecstasy of being on the street and feeling that I, as an individual, was in a sea of people, that I had been somehow lost. And in some strange way, in the same way that, gospel singers talk about, I had been lost, but I had also been found in that glorious political movement where millions of people were on the street demanding the same thing. And my voice, however small I was one among theirs. So one of the things that I keep talking about when I go visit younger students in this country is I invite them to be politically active, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the one thing they can do in order to make their own lives exciting and more meaningful. Because I know from the experience of 1979, however badly that revolution went, and it couldn't go any worse than it did, the moment of the revolution, the moment of people taking to the streets, demanding the same thing, dreaming the same dream for the entire country, which was freedom, democracy, greater civil liberties, being part of that greater collective was a very, very transformative experience. And I think we all, can do both. We can be, individuals. We can insist on our distinctions in one dimension, and then have this grand collective experience of knowing what it's like to all become one. And I think one of the great things that America has done, though it can probably do better in the future, is to do just that, to allow the Greeks to come to America and introduce their cuisine and introduce their music and introduce their art to this culture, remain Greek to the extent that they wish, and yet identify as Americans, which is why, you know, compared to so many other Western nations, we are, with all of our shortcomings, the most integrated, or I should say, most successful Western nation in bringing our immigrants in, and in both giving them room to exercise their own culture, but also feel that they can be an American just as much. And I think to lose that is to give up probably one of the most wonderful aspects, not just of nationhood, but also of what every individual yearns, which is to be part of the greater collective. And I think we can do both.
Yes, yeah, you're right. I mean, in my experience, having lived in different countries and settling in the US, I feel that this is a country that allows you to be yourself and to be part of the larger, you can be political if you want, you can, do whatever, the individual freedoms that you don't experience in other places. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I think we share this, is that with the concept that there is in America about Iran, how people feel about Iran, you were sort of afraid to say that you were Iranian. Well, same thing happened to me. I came from a country that when people ask me, where are you from? I was sort of like afraid to say Colombia, because they start asking me, oh, do you have marijuana? Do you have drugs? Do you, and it was something like, you feel like you come from countries that have established some kind of stereotype, and you don't want to be that stereotype because you're not. Exactly. Yes, exactly.
But both of us, I'm sure you have experienced that too. We're exposed to those cliches. But what I find really intriguing and wonderful is that we both had the opportunity to also put the matter straight, right? You were able to criticize them back and tell them that they were silly to think so, and also give them your own account of what a diverse and wonderful and complex nation Colombia is, and I have been giving that opportunity also to hear all the cliches and stereotypes that are on, but also I'm also the one who publishes op-eds, who criticizes those stereotypes and those cliches, and tries to set the matter as straight as I can. So I think we can say that there are stereotypes we dislike, but I also love the opportunity that somehow exists for both of us to speak and to say what readers and our fellow Americans should be thinking.
Yes, you're right. At one point in your book, you ponder if there could be a revolution brewing here, and chaos could have followed you to America. In my experience, newly arrived from Colombia, escaping the violence there, I experienced the sound and the blast wave of the terrorist bombing in Oklahoma City in 1995. And I felt that terror had followed us.
Isn't that amazing? I mean,
yeah, it's, in a way, with all the wonderful things that we experience in the US, there are some elements from our past hard political experiences that that shakes us, when something like this happens. I was, when I watched the January problem, I felt I was watching the Supreme Court in Colombia and all the judges being killed by the guerrillas, which is what I watched when I was in Colombia. So, some of these things are sort of like push buttons that happens unconsciously. We have some push buttons. Yeah, yeah. But at this, yeah, go ahead.
I'm thrilled that you say this because, I felt this for years and years. I on 9/11, I was walking on the streets and I was thinking, I was in New York and I was thinking, I know this. I just never thought it would come here.
Yes.
And so, here's an additional reason why we are essential to this country, because we bring all of these backgrounds, we have experience with all of these threats that can undermine this democracy. And we are the ones who can be somewhat of a moral compass, who can sound the alarm when everybody else can misread or misinterpret. And so I think, in a strange way, the fact that we have been exposed to all the traumas that we've been exposed and are here now is an advantage for this country, because we don't misread. We know what it's like when mobs take over. We know how wrong things can go when democratic values are threatened. And I think these experiences, especially at this particular time in the history of this country, can be significantly important in trying to preserve what we have here, and trying to keep the integrity of this democracy solid.
There is a question that people always ask. And it is, where do you feel that home is? Mm-hmm. What is home for you? People always ask that.
What is home for you?
Yeah, I think home for me is in my head. Home is in my head. Mm-hmm. Because, if you start thinking about what you had or what it was before, then you become an unhappy individual. I think that home, it's something that you make in your mind, and that you can make a niche any place you go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you feel about home. What's home?
Well, similar to you, I think I actually wrote something for 9/11 last month. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that piece, which ran in the Washington Post, I said, there are two ways of thinking about America. One is America, the country. The other is America, the idea. Mm-hmm. I belong more than anything to America, the idea.
Idea, yes.
And America, yes. The idea is my home. And that idea is, liberty, pursuit of happiness, equality for genders, the possibilities of, creating possibilities and opportunities for people, regardless of their, ethnic, religious, racial background, to pursue their dreams. that America is my homeland. And I think the sooner we see this as global citizens, the better off we all are. The better off we are in trying to preserve some of these institutions and values that we so love and have grown accustomed to. We can think of our countries in terms of borders, but we know that that's sort of a bygone definition. Coronavirus has proved that if it can't contain it in China, you and I in the United States can't. And the global warming has also proven to us that if we can't work together to control this monster and bring down the emissions and all sorts of damage that we have done to the environment, we're all in trouble. So I think we have many indications that tell us that we're all in it together, and that those geographical boundaries that we once set for ourselves in some ways are meaningless. So the sooner we recognize that whatever country we choose to live in needs to be a country of the mind, where we strive for or live by common values and principles. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness can be, three of those, but then we surely can add to them. Then the better off we all are. And I think, so I share your vision that it is a place in the mind, because the geographical boundary has become more and more obsolete and meaningless. And so, you and I are here because we have the democratic values and the civil liberties that neither one of us had in our home countries, in our birthplaces. So, we belong to where these principles are exercised, and we can unbelong if those rights are taken away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Well, and I think when you're an artist, when you're writing, when you're creating something, your boundaries, you don't want to have boundaries. I mean, it's the freedom to choose what you want to do, how you want to do it. You want to write what you want to write. You want to write your poetry, your feelings, so that boundaries per se are very difficult to tackle for an artist.
Exactly. I mean, it's unpleasant, right? If we wanted boundaries, then we would be, accountants, with all due
with all due respect to accountants. Yes. I'm glad they are not accountants.
Accountants can be very freedom-loving people. I don't mean that, but I mean, if we're good with,
sure.
Outlines and keeping track of things closely and all that. If we wanted to fit ourselves into certain definitions, then we wouldn't be who we are.
Yeah, exactly. And another point is that once you're here, once you live here, once you're participating of all the processes, you don't even think about, I was not born here.
Right.
I mean, myself, I mean, I don't have the pleasure of not having an accent as you do, you do. To me, you do not have an accent of a foreign, to me, I'm always saying, oh, I wish I did not have an accent. Anyway, but I don't think about not belonging here in a way that I can contribute and that I can do. You write very appropriately how after many years of living in the US, where you talk about it, or whether you talk about it or not, you always remain, people remain a refugee, an immigrant, even if people have lost their accent or traces of their past life. To what extent do you feel this defines you?
Hugely. And it really surprised me because, again, in 2016, as I'm thinking, I'm so cool, I fit in perfectly. And as you say, I didn't really try to lose my accent. It just went away.
Okay. Oh, wonderful.
I don't know. I love accents. So I didn't try. But regardless, I was at the peak of my having, fit in and, so-called, resettled, assimilated, however we want to call it. And yet, in 2016, when the rhetoric started to change, when the Muslim ban came, and then there were additional caveats too. Do you remember that one of the things that the former president said was, maybe we shouldn't allow people who don't speak English? And I'm like, I didn't speak English. And then, maybe we shouldn't allow immigrants who don't have any skills. And I go, I had just graduated high school. I had no skills. So, it's really there. I think, we have a neighbor in our block who is 97 years old, whom I adore. And I've known him for many, many years. And even though he's a very well-off human being today, he always rations everything. And he always has, extra cans of goods in his basement. And apparently his wife confides in me every once in a while, and he says, he's a child of depression era. Do you understand? He has certain fears about running out of food and all that you have to understand. He acts weird sometimes, but it's because of that past. And I think, for us, it's similar, no? I mean, there are these fears and anxieties that leave an imprint in our souls. And I think being a refugee for a year, as I was in Europe, not knowing where I would land eventually, if I would land anywhere, really left an imprint in me. And that, with, one or two sentences or comments can immediately stir in me all those memories that belong to that bygone past. And so I think there are ways in which certain experiences are so fundamental that it truly, truly changes the makeup of who we are. And I think being an immigrant, being a refugee is just that way, which is why I felt so strongly that I should speak on behalf of the immigrant at a time when immigrants were under threat. And so my response to this turn in the national attitude, or this threatening rhetoric, was to try to make the immigrant more accessible, more knowable to the American public.
It's the thing that your book does is something that sociologists that write about immigration and so on would have never tackled. We have people who write about immigration from the economical viewpoint, from the political, from the sociological viewpoints. But your book tackles these issues of economics, of language, of awe, of, you know, all these things that are not statistically put on, you know, because statistics, you read 20% and 60%, and many a time people have no clue what that means. But the thing is that you write about the strength and the vulnerability of the immigrant, and what happens when there is the opportunity, and when that individual is able to reach, I mean, to do the things. I mean, you're a professor at Yale, okay? So, you know, these are the kinds of things that that you write about that are really very poignant, and they really give people the idea in the flesh of what it is, and also shows the image and the wonderful openness, in a way, of the American ideal. Yes.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a giant compliment. Thank you so much. I did intend to portray exactly what you say, which is the visceral experience or visceral meaning of being an immigrant, something beyond the numbers and the data. And I thought that is the way I can make the immigrant human. But you know, interestingly, in the process, it seems as though I've done something else too, which is I've also made it possible for native-born Americans to see an America that they don't see. So, you know, I recognize this from some of the reviews of the book on the Amazon page. You know, readers say, I was born and raised in this country, but, you know, I learned things about it that I had not realized or known prior to reading this book. And that initially wasn't my intention, but I'm delighted that it happened, that I showed, you know, those who have always been born and raised here, the America that you and I see, because we look at it from the perspective of people who come from elsewhere.
You know, it's very interesting if we make a contrast between the writing that you do in this book and the music and lyrics of Laurie Anderson.
Also,
yeah, because Laurie Anderson also shows us the America. And she's from Middle America, you know, even though she lives and she's lived forever in New York City, but the analysis that she does, and she's an American born, you know. So I was putting you and her together as, you know, a contrast in a way that talk about some of the things, you know, and she is saying some of the things about America as an artist, and you as an immigrant and a American citizen. Yes, yeah. So I think we should open for some questions from the audience.
Somebody suggesting that I read from the book. I can read a passage if you like.
That would be great.
Great.
At some point in the book, and the book is written in second person. So the narrator is a naturalized citizen who is giving advice to those immigrants who've just arrived. And so this is a passage about shopping, how shopping in America is different from shopping where the immigrant came from. So here we go. In lieu of haggling, once the most satisfying aspect of any shopping experience for you and your fellow expatriates, you have embraced the exercise of returning, which might well be haggling's fair-haired twin. On weekends, you load your spacious trunks with the purchased goods you plan to return, something that was unthinkable where you came from. At first, you even return the things you need, just to see if you can. When this belief gives way to faith in the sanctity of the return policy, you begin to return only what truly needs returning. You had expected to see the suspension bridges, the underwater tunnels, the endless forests and bottomless seas. But it is the exercise of returning goods that is the surest sign of America's greatness. The experience of an underwater tunnel lasts only a few minutes. However, the experience of a trial sweatshirt whose price tag scratches against the nape lasts for days. It is why you cherish your receipts and keep them alongside other well-guarded family treasures. Returning items is the proof that the consumer, one of the several manifestations of the citizen, is formidable in America. It is the evidence that anything is possible because a one-time decision need not be destiny. You can change your fate here and turn it in for a better one. Taking the oath of allegiance is a rote promise. To stand head high at a customer service counter, receipt in hand, turning in an unwanted garment is an actual step toward claiming one's rights, acting as an entitled citizen would. Even after all these years, each time a reluctant shopkeeper takes an item back, you stagger out in awe, praising God and his most unsung messenger, George Washington. This is one of the many small joys of living in America that only you, privileged with a keen knowledge of despotism, deeply cherish.
That is so wonderful.
Moving from something that is as delightful as you just read to a more serious topic. Bernard asked, what is your reaction to the thousands of Haitians who are waiting to enter our country? How should we deal with them?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think, similarly, we can say, what's our reaction as a nation to the thousands of migrants who keep piling up at the southern border. I think there is a way in which we ought to not define these as immigration issues, but global issues that need our global cooperative attention. In other words, I think, no matter how many Haitians we can accept into this country, and we should, or how many migrants who are at the southern border we can accept into this country, and we should, we will never end the problem. They will never stop coming, and we will perpetually face this crisis like these, which will only worsen because of environmental and other factors. So I think the best response is to recognize, as I said earlier, that thinking about nations and countries as geographical entities belong to another century. We are now a global entity. We are now smaller nations within a larger nation, which is this universal nation on Earth. And therefore, we need to come up with global solutions, greater cooperation, to understand that, we need to address the problems of, Guatemalan or Honduran farmers who can no longer farm because of droughts in their areas, before they need to feel uprooted to come to our border. Or we need to address the problem of, Haitian tyrannies or corruption within the governments, because, hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into Haiti in the past 10, 15 years, and yet the country hasn't created the infrastructure that it needs. So if we don't address these global issues, no matter, and if we continue to, define these problems as immigration problems, we will never solve them. And the immigrants will never, the individuals will never stop coming. And we will be steeped in crisis after crisis. So I think we need to change the perspective and recognize that as soon as there is a crisis in this continent, in South America, whether it's drought or domestic violence or earthquake and corruption subsequently, we need to respond as a united continent to address them with the help of those local governments, so that those individuals, those citizens, won't have to uproot themselves to come here, because there's only so many of them we can allow in. And these problems are only going to grow.
Shelley has a comment and question in it also. She mentions coming back to the United States in 1979, arriving to Miami. And she was always fielding questions about why Persians came to the United States and not to Israel. Mm-hmm. Have you had to address that question?
Yeah, well, all of my paternal side of my family all landed in Israel. And all of my maternal side of the family came to America. Some of that has to do with, family reunification. My brothers were already here in America, and, we came in order to, join them. In the case of the paternal side of my family, my father had uncles and great uncles who had, a couple of whom had walked from Iran to Israel, in
wow.
the 1930s and the 1940s. So they already had established roots in that area. And so some of the paternal relatives went because they felt that they could count on the help of those relatives in Israel. So I think a lot of it depended on who had, what anchors in those two countries. And also, I think economic characteristics had something to do with it too. I think the Iranian Jews who didn't feel that economically confident, or were middle class or lower middle class, felt that Israel would give them a greater advantage, and went there. And I think those who somehow felt that they could, give it a go in the United States because they had greater resources and means, came here.
Right. So the family reunification and family ties are such a critical issue in these decisions. No? Mm-hmm. We thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
It's such a pleasure for being here. Congratulations on this work and for writing it at this time, which was so necessary.
Perfect. Wonderful. Yes, thank you.
So very much. Yes. I really enjoyed it. Gloria, it was a privilege to be in conversation.
Oh, it was great talking with you. Yes.
Thank you, Ron.